You're at 18,000 feet over occupied France. The world below looks harmless patchwork fields, a quiet river flashing like a silver ribbon. Up here you have space, you have options, you have time. Your briefing said altitude is safety. It's wrong. Summer of 43. 8th Air Force fighter losses are climbing faster than replacements. BF 109 seconds and FWE 190 seconds own this band of sky 15 to 25,000 feet. They drop out of the sun, rake a Thunderbolt with cannon fire, and vanish before you can even key the mic. Up here, the odds feel good, right, until they aren't. Take a breath. Listen. That hiss in your headset, the steady rumble of the R2800, the wind slipping past the canopy, you think these sounds mean control. They don't. They're a countdown you can't hear yet. Look left, contrails etch the sky, like chalk lines on a blackboard. Look right, sun glare off a canopy you didn't notice a second ago. By the time your brain says threat, their guns have already said impact. You were told to keep your height, fight vertical, never give it up. Gospel, written in peacetime, paid for in blood. This is the story of how one unit Colonel Hubert Zemke's 56th Fighter Group flipped that gospel on its head. How American pilots learned to hunt at 50 feet, to turn hedgerows into cover, to make physics their wingman. How you go from being bounced at altitude to becoming the blur no one can track. Strap in. We're leaving the safety of theory and going where the manuals swore you shouldn't. Treetop low where surprise lives and mistakes kill. You were trained on a simple creed. Keep your altitude. Height is energy. Energy is life. Fight in the vertical. Trade altitude for speed on your terms. Never give it up. Every diagram in the manual showed clean arrows, climb, dive, yo-yo, like geometry class with guns. From 20,000 feet, the horizon is a promise. See first, act first, leave when you want. That was the doctrine. But doctrine only survives until it meets an opponent who writes his own. Across the channel, your opposite number is flying a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or a Focke-Wulf 190 lighter, climbing like a homesick angel, rolling fast. Their controllers stack them in the sun, slightly above your route. When the moment comes, they don't dogfight, they bounce. A bounce is physics with malice. Gravity adds its own boost, 30, 40 knots by the time they cross your tail. 20mm cannon don't ask questions. 2 short bursts, then a steep climb back to the safety of altitude while your formation breaks. Each pilot alone in a big sky that suddenly feels very small. You can't react to what you never saw. And at Halesworth, in a cold room that smells like coffee and hydraulic fluid, a colonel named Hubert Zemke keeps losing chairs. Not literally, he keeps losing the men who sat in them. The 56th Fighter Group, the Wolfpack, has the best training and the latest Thunderbolts. It isn't enough. You've heard the roll calls go shorter. You've watched crews stencil new names under canopies and scrape off old ones. The ops board still says standard sweep, Angels 18 to 22. The board doesn't feel the bounce. Zemke does. Numbers don't care about doctrine. June through September 43, fighter losses mount month over month, faster than replacements can ship across the Atlantic. Every increase has a shape, an ambush cone, a sun angle, a timing window. High altitude is supposed to give you reaction time. Instead, it's giving the enemy position. You could try to climb more, except the higher you are, the longer their dive, the more speed they carry, the cleaner their exit. You can tighten your formation, except tight formations die in bunches. You can turn to meet them, except they've already shot where you're going to be. Up here, altitude isn't saving you, it's exposing you. Colonel Zemke asks a question most people don't let themselves ask. What if the answer isn't up? What if it's down? Going down means giving up the one advantage you can measure height. It means less time to see, less time to think, no room to fix a mistake. It means flak crews won't need math, they'll need nerve. It sounds like suicide in a single-engine fighter. It also sounds like something else. Surprise. German radar works line of sight. Below a few hundred feet, returns smear into ground clutter trees, buildings, hills. At altitude, they get 3 minutes to vector a bounce. At 50 feet, the first cue isn't a scope. It's sound, and you've got 11 seconds from first engine note to impact. Down here, the geometry changes. Flak lead times collapse. Pursuit curves become cliffs, one wrong correction, and a 109 eats a hedgerow. Villages, river cuts, tree lines, terrain, turns into cover the way clouds once did. You're not playing the same game. You're not even on the same board. Zemke's Wolfpack isn't reckless. They're methodical. He doesn't announce a revolution in a memo. He pulls 3 veterans aside, men who've buried wingmen, and he tells them the unthinkable. After the escort, drop. Not to 10,000, not to 5, all the way down. Skim the trees. See what physics does. High altitude promised time. It delivered ambush. Low altitude promises nothing except a chance to choose the fight. On a gray September morning, 3 Thunderbolts leave the safety of doctrine and aim for the hedges. They're not kids. Walker Bud Mahurin already knows what a bounce feels like. Bob Johnson has counted cannon holes and lived to tell it. Jerry Johnson is the quiet one. Steady hands, no theatrics. Zemke pulls these 3 because they've buried wingmen and still fly like professionals. Today, they'll fly like thieves. Briefing is 1 page. Escort the heavies, then drop. After the bombers turn for home, push through the bottom of the cloud deck and don't stop until the hedges blur. No formation parade. 4 ship becomes a pair and a single to thin the radar picture. Radio's cold unless something's on fire. You leave the doctrine at 18,000 feet. At 10,000, your ears pop. At 5, the fields get texture. At 200, France becomes a tunnel. Church spires, water towers, and telephone poles aren't scenery, they're obstacles. Your horizon is a hedgerow that never arrives. Mahurin spots the pattern first. Concrete, revetments, the glint of canopies. Beauvais, TA. FW 190 seconds on the line. Chalks in, cruise casual. The control tower doesn't look at the horizon. At treetop level, you're not the picture they expect. Throttle through the stop. Line the pipper on aluminum, not air. At 50 feet and 350 indicated, there's no deflection problem, there's a time problem. 2 seconds on each target. Don't fixate, don't look back. First, 190 lights like a match. Second, coughs, smoke, and folds. The third tries to turn into you and catches the last of a burst. The fourth dies from ricochet and bad luck. 11 seconds from sound to silence. Then the field rushes behind you like a guilty thought. You don't climb. You don't circle to admire the work. You stay low and leave lower fence lines, stream beds, a ribbon of road that points northwest. The only call on the radio is a single word that means everyone's still breathing. On the way out, a column of trucks appears at a crossroads. It's a gift and a trap. Discipline wins. No second pass. You didn't come to be brave, you came to be gone. Back at Halesworth, the debrief is short. The notes read like a dare to the future. Low-level approach successful. Targets unalerted. Enemy flak ineffective at attack speed. Recommend further trials. No one uses the word revolution. They don't have to. On September 27th, 1943, 3 Thunderbolts proved a hypothesis with gunsmoke. The sky wasn't the only place to fight for air superiority. Sometimes, the winning altitude is hedge height. Systems win wars and systems have seams. The Luftwaffe's early warning web in France was a 2-part machine. Freya to see far, Würzburg to point guns. Both lived by one rule of nature, line of sight. Radar waves don't bend around the earth, they skim it. Below a few hundred feet, returns drowned in ground clutter trees, barns, church spires, hills. At altitude, you're a clean blip. At hedge height, you're noise. The network still talks, but it's talking late. That delay doesn't just feel bad, it changes math. Early warning buys fighters time to climb, turn into the sun, and bounce. Kill chains are tempo chains. Detect, decide, do. When detection slips, everything else arrives too late. At treetop level, the first cue isn't a scope blip, it's sound. A Pratt & Whitney R2000 800 announces itself before it arrives. From the first engine note at a forward airfield to bullets on target, the window compresses to roughly 11 seconds. 11 seconds is less than an NFL play clock. It's not enough to sprint to a cockpit, not enough to spin a flak predictor, barely enough to understand what's happening. The Thunderbolt pilot doesn't outthink you, he outtimes you. Speed at low altitude does 2 things at once. It hides you in the noise, and it turns decision time into heartbeats. That's why the approach is single pass. No victory laps, no second looks. 11 seconds in, you're already gone. The ground gunners aren't fools. They're trapped by physics. To hit anything, you don't shoot where it is, you shoot where it will be. That means lead. At 350 miles an hour and 50 feet off the deck, the lead angle balloons while your time of flight stays stubborn. Light flak 20 and 37 mm needs smooth visual tracking, but at hedge height, the target isn't an airplane, it's a blur. Your traverse is jerky, your elevation is cramped by buildings and trees, and by the time the gunner's brain believes his eyes, the jug is a quarter mile past the aim point. Heavy flak 88s can swat bombers at altitude with plotted fuses. Against a treetop blur, they're sledgehammers chasing flies. You can kill a low flyer if he climbs, if he turns back, if he overstays. The Thunderbolt's playbook forbids all three. Ballistics punishes hesitation, so does terrain. 50 feet offers speed protection but 0 altitude to spend. That's why the pass is shallow, the pipper time is 1 second, and egress stays glued to the contours. Now flip the picture. A BF-109 sees you streaking under him and dives. He owns altitude, speed, angles on paper, but at 50 feet, the error budget is 0. One correction too deep and he meets the hillside. One pull too hard and his wing loads spike. One eye off the tree line and the ground wins. Pursuit is geometry, and geometry down low is cruel. Your turning circle is bounded by dirt. The Thunderbolt pilot keeps the fight two-dimensional. He uses river bends as S-turns, villages' streets as canyons, tree lines as curtains. If you follow him in, you give up the one thing a high-altitude hunter needs: margin. Most German fighters break off, not because they lack nerve, but because physics is a better teacher than doctrine. They were trained for vertical games, with 10,000 feet of forgiveness. Down here, the birds live. Down here, the hill you don't see is the hill that kills you. The Thunderbolt wasn't built for treetops, but its mass and momentum make the trick survivable. The big radial up front gives you throttle authority. The turbo plumbing keeps power honest. The airframe soaks punishment. Low doesn't remove risk. It trades risks. You can't manage surprise bounces, altitude traps for risks you can train, timing, terrain reading, 1-second marksmanship. None of this is magic. It's a checklist. Arrive unseen, commit once, fire in windows measured in heartbeats, leave lower than you arrived. If you have to ask whether to make a second pass, you've already answered wrong. Put it together and the picture is simple. The early warning chain loses you to clutter. The reaction window collapses to 11 seconds. The flak math breaks under speed and sightlines. And pursuit geometry flips the fear from hunted to hunter. At 50 feet and 350 indicated, you're not playing by the old rules. You're writing new ones with treetops and timing. An idea only matters if the machine can carry it. The Thunderbolt could. Under that big round nose lived a Pratt & Whitney R2000, 818 cylinders, 2 rows, a factory of torque. But the secret wasn't only up front. It was hiding in the fuselage, behind the pilot. Exhaust gas left the cylinders, ran down long ducts, and spun a General Electric turbo supercharger mounted in the aft fuselage. Compressed air was cooled in intercoolers set into the fuselage flanks, piped forward, and fed into the engine's own gear-driven supercharger. The payoff was altitude power, 25,000 feet, still felt like sea level to a well-trimmed jug. The trade-offs were mass and complexity. The plumbing made the belly deep, and the maintenance charts thick. Cowl flaps, oil coolers, wastegates, more levers for the pilot, more failure points for the crew chief. But mass has its own gift at 50 feet, stability. A heavy airframe rides dirty air better. It punches through turbulence, hugging hedgerows without skittering. When pilots began flying the jug where birds live, another reality hit them: France. Not the Wehrmacht, the country itself. Branches, fence posts, invisible wires strung between poles. So Republic quietly added survival where it mattered. By late 43, armor plates under the belly, and the lower cowling protected hydraulic lines and oil coolers from the kind of hits no textbook warned about: tree kisses, wire wraps, the pilot's own mistakes. Pilots brought back branches in landing gear bays and lived to joke about it. Visibility got a fix too. Early Thunderbolts wore a razorback spine that blocked the aft view. Starting with the D, 25 blocks in the spring of 44, the jug earned a British-inspired bubble canopy. Now the pilot could see the flak that mattered what he was about to fly into. Sights evolved slower. The famous K-14 gyroscopic gun sight, the American take on the Ferranti, doesn't show up in numbers until late 44, common on D, 40 blocks and retrofits. Before that, pilots used reflector sights and discipline. 1 second windows, 1 clean burst. Range was the other lever. A low-level hunter still has to get to the hunt. Wet pylons under the wings became standard from the D-15 block, feeding paper tanks lightweight, resin-impregnated drop tanks that extended patrols and got tossed before the run. More gas meant deeper cuts on the map. But machines don't change doctrine. People do. New arrivals to England didn't go straight to the front. They went to school RAF Atcham under the 495th Fighter Training Group. The curriculum was brutally practical. How not to die at 50 feet. Navigation at 50 feet meant reading a river's bend like a road map and counting hedgerows as mile markers. Instructors sent flights across Shropshire at treetop level to make pilots feel the speed in their bones, not just their instruments. If you feel relaxed, you're too high. If you feel terrified, you're paying attention. 1-second shots were a skill, not a slogan. You lined up, let the pipper cross the engine block of a locomotive, or the wing root of a parked fighter, and fired a single disciplined burst. 50 seconds didn't need long to decide arguments. Formation at hedge height took a special kind of trust. 2-ship and 4-ship elements learned spacing by wingtip feel, not by tape measure. The lead's job was to keep the terrain scan and the timing. The wingman's job was to be there when flak snapped at the empty air the lead had just vacated. And they drilled the rules that physics wrote. No second passes. Egress in the weeds. If you can't name your exit route before you roll in, you don't roll in. Down low, a good plan beats a good turn. The classroom finished what the cutaway started. Pilots learned what the wastegate felt like under their fingers, how manifold pressure sagged when you yanked the throttle too fast, why the intercooler doors mattered when you were hot and heavy on the deck. Fear
All right,
wasn't
gentlemen,
ignored.
today we're going
It
to
was
talk about
trained.
precision
Instructors
and focus.
talked about useful fear, the kind that keeps you honest. A pilot who stopped being afraid at 50 feet became a statistic. Commanders grounded aces for flying under bridges, not because they lacked skill, but because they'd forgotten respect. None of this worked if maintenance couldn't keep tempo. Crew chiefs learned the new bruises, scuffed belly panels, nicked prop edges, oil cooler dents from debris. They safety wired what France tried to shake loose. Rearm, refuel, relaunch in 20 minutes became a rhythm. Block differences mattered in the margins. A D-22 with a bigger disc prop demanded a high nose on landing. Botch it and you'd kiss the runway with your tips. A bubble-top D-25 made clearing your 6 on ingress instinctive. A D-15 with wet pylons bought an extra 30 minutes of hunting. Little things, stacked, turned tactics into habit. Even the checklists changed. High-altitude escort doctrine preached vertical energy and mutual support. The low-level cards started with different verbs. Mask, commit, cut, exit. It read more like a fire brigade manual than a dogfighting guide. And woven through the pages was humility. The jug could take punishment, but it wasn't invulnerable. Power lines don't care about horsepower. Birds don't care about man-hours. The point of training wasn't invincibility. It was survivability, multiplied across a group until a tactic became a system. So the pathway ran straight. An idea born of unacceptable losses. A machine heavy enough to ride the weeds and powerful enough to leave in one piece. And people drilled until seconds felt like minutes, and fear felt like a seatbelt. With that triangle idea, machine, skill, the jug stopped surviving at 50 feet and started hunting there. By April 44, low became choreography. 4-ship elements broke off the channel haze at 100 feet, then 50, sliding inland along river cuts and hedgerows. The targets weren't single dots. They were a lattice airfields ringed around Paris and the Norman Plain. Evreux first canopies open, engines idling for dawn patrol. Then Bernay-Saint-Martin, 8 minutes later, Beaumont-le-Roger 4 minutes after that. Conches en Auche as the radio warnings were still forming sentences. Each field, the same math, appear from nowhere, 11 seconds on the deck, leave a row of burning airframes, disappear back into the folds of the countryside. Northward, Creil and Beauvais-Tillet turned into smoldering geometry, fuel trucks flashing to fire, maintenance crews diving for berms. Farther up, Abbeville and Amiens took their turns. It wasn't a single raid, it was a tempo. If you were a Luftwaffe controller, you weren't chasing bandits, you were chasing ghosts that had already been and gone. Angriff Tief, Richtung Südwest, attack, low, from the southwest. Verlegen flak battery, relocate the flak battery. Start Sparren, block takeoffs. The first counter move was dispersal. Stop parking fighters in neat rows near the runway, hide them in tree lines, barns, individual revetments scattered across the countryside. It kept airplanes alive. It killed readiness. A Messerschmitt in a farmer's barn 2 kilometers from the runway needs 20 minutes to reach, fuel, arm, and launch. That's the difference between intercepting and hearing gunfire in the distance. Next, they pushed the flak belt outward. 20 and 37s dragged a kilometer from the field to catch jugs before they rolled in. Terrain masking made that a guess. Thunderbolt surfed riverbanks and tree lines, popped inside the ring before the gunners' brains caught up with their eyes, then strafed the gun pits on the way out. A flak gun in an open field is also a target. They tried eyes, observer networks in villages around airfields, phone trees to warn of engine noise, 30 precious seconds to run. The resistance polluted the net with ghosts, false bearings, phantom flights. Within weeks, the signal-to-noise died, and units stopped trusting the calls. 30 seconds of warning is plenty of time to live. It isn't time to save an airplane. And then came armor. Special WWII, 190 seconds with extra plate and heavy cannon sent prowling low to ambush hedgehoppers when they were heads down on targets. At 50 feet, the only thing worse than being light and late is being heavy and late. The armored 190 seconds were slower and less nimble. The hunting windows were too small. They bled away in single encounters, and the experiment faded. You can adapt to one element, maybe two, not all of them at once. April wasn't about the biggest number on a chalkboard. It was about synchronized shocks, time on target, separated by minutes, not hours. Hit Avro, when the radio net turns to warn conches, you're already on conches. Bernay-Saint-Martin tries to scramble. Beauvais-Tilley is already burning. Controllers pushed squadrons toward blips that were gunsmoke by the time wheels left concrete. German ground crews adapted in ways that traded combat power for survival. Camouflage nets multiplied. Aircraft were towed into orchards. Refuelers hid behind hedgerows, but hiding spreads your force and slows your hand. War punishes what's slow. Flak crews drilled lead angles for level targets. Low-level attacks broke those habits. A jug at 350 miles an hour and 50 feet is a textbook problem that the textbook forgot to assign. By the time a shell arrived where the formulas said it should, the Thunderbolt was a quarter-mile past. And when fighters did get airborne, pursuit geometry turned predatory. To chase a low jug, you dive into a shrinking funnel. Every correction points your nose closer to terrain. The first mistake is the last. Many German pilots chose altitude over a few low-percentage shots and lived to fight a different day. Cause: vanish under radar horizons and clutter. Effect: warning shrinks from minutes to seconds. Cause: speed and masking at 50 feet. Effect: flak belts track air that's already empty. Cause: synchronized strikes. Effect: radios loose to timing. Cause: hard survivable airframe. Effect: pilots risk the weeds and come back. Unit histories for 8. Fighter command list April low-level strikes like metronome ticks. Not every pass scored. Some cost airplanes. But as a system, the pressure-built airfields locked down, fuel and ammo points cratered, rail spurs chewed. It set conditions for the month that mattered. You can fix one hole in a dam. 2, if you're fast. April punched 5 at once. And when the flood came in June, nothing upstream could reach the beaches in time. Before the first ramp dropped on Omaha or Utah, the sky at 50 feet went to work. Pre-H hour, Thunderbolts fanned out treetop low to lock airfields inside a 150-mile ring. Not a single armada of high bombers fast. Silent cuts. You don't jam the door. You nail it shut from the hinges outward. Take Kryl. Dawn checks, canopies cracked, ground crews waving chocks. Then the sound arrives before the blips. 11 seconds from first engine note to impacts on the flight line. The men live if they sprint. The airplanes don't. That rhythm repeated across the ring. The result wasn't dramatic aerial duels. It was absence. Absence of takeoffs. Absence of climbs. Absence of opposition over the beaches. The other half of the day was the rails. Weeks before D-Day, Allied air forces began to cut France into islands, yards, bridges, junctions. Crews called it the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, but it wasn't a one-off stunt. It was a sustained demolition of timetables. On D-Day, the pattern matured. Train after train never makes the last 10 miles to the front. Bridges don't fall cleanly in one go. You drop a span Tuesday, the detour line Wednesday, the yard throat on Friday. By Sunday, what used to be a 6-hour move is a 3-day crawl through craters. Low-altitude skip bombing on fuel points, strafing engine decks where armor is thinnest. The mission set looks messy from above. On the highway, it's simple. Stop anything that moves toward Normandy in daylight. By nightfall, June 6th, the count reads like a verdict. Allied air forces fly roughly 14,500 sorties. The Luftwaffe manages about 319. Those aren't just numbers, they're probabilities. If you're an Allied rifleman, the probability that a German fighter strafes your beach is near 0. If you're a German pilot, the probability you cross that 50-foot gauntlet and find the fleet is lower still. This wasn't achieved by a single spectacular strike. It was throughput. Fly, land, rearm, refuel, launch again turns measured in minutes. Some pilots flew 4 sorties before sunset. The sky over Normandy wasn't empty. It was saturated, and saturated on our side. When Luftwaffe fighters did claw airborne, They met two traps. At treetop, Thunderbolts with guns hot. Above the cloud, Mustangs waiting. A handful reached the coast, none changed the outcome. Operations are systems. On June 6th, the system clicked. Fields denied, routes interdicted, reaction windows reduced from minutes to seconds. The Luftwaffe didn't just fail to show up, they couldn't. Commanders bet the invasion on air supremacy. Low-level Thunderbolts cashed that check in silence you could measure in empty runways, stalled trains, bridges that no longer spanned rivers. What looked like chaos at 50 feet was design, and design is what keeps ships unloading and men moving inland. Low-level fighting doesn't just threaten you with the enemy, it threatens you with the countryside itself. Lieutenant James Goodson learned that the hard way over the Loire. 1 second the view is amber fields, the next, the windshield erupts blood, feathers, broken plexiglass. A crow, at 300 miles an hour, is not a bird, it's flying flak. Half-blind, eyes tearing, he fights not an opponent but physics, wind clawing at the sockets, adrenaline spiking his hands. He doesn't jink or roll, he climbs steep, steady, up out of the hedge zone. He makes an emergency strip. They pull glass from his cheeks. The debrief note is plain. Bird strike, the lesson is not. If the birds scatter, there's something there. A wire, a tower, another airplane. At 50 feet, the birds know the map better than you. The enemy you never see is the one that's strung between poles. Rural France is laced with power and telephone lines, thin, weather-colored, exactly where you're flying. In April and May 44, the 8th Air Force loses multiple Thunderbolts to wires alone, administrative losses in the ledger. But to a pilot, they're the worst kind, the kind that feels stupid. Lieutenant William O'Brien catches a line near Chartres. It wraps the prop, drags 3 poles before it snaps. The jolt nearly tears the engine off the mounts. 10 miles later, the vibration says enough, he bails. When the recovery team finds the jug, 40 feet of copper is still braided into the blades. No one fires a shot, and you still go down. The toll of flying at hedge height isn't just in wreckage, it's in bodies. 2 hours of maximum concentration at 300+ miles an hour, your eyes tracking hedges, chimneys, steeples, the invisible line that will ruin your day. You land bone cold in a 50-degree cockpit and climb out soaked through. Hands shake so hard that some pilots can't write their own after-action reports. They dictate. And then there's the other danger, the one that wears your face. Surviving 10, 20, 30 low-level sorties can trick you. Fear recedes. Caution blurs into swagger. At 50 feet, that's not morale, it's a countdown. One squadron commander watches a talented pilot slip under a railway bridge because he can. It looks like mastery. It's actually the absence of fear. He grounds the man for a week, not as punishment, but as maintenance on the one instrument no checklist covers: judgment. Flight surgeons start to see a pattern. The best hedge hoppers carry 2 equal truths at once. Speed saves you, and hubris kills you. The tactic depends on momentum, on being a blur. The flak can't track, and a problem a fighter won't chase into terrain. But momentum has a blind spot. It whispers that the math will always break your way. So the culture adapts. Briefings add a line item. Wires, bird behavior, church spires. 1 second shots means 1 second no lazy second pass. The Wolfpack's unofficial creed hardens. Live in fear, act with speed. When you stop being afraid, you stop being safe. Low-level tactics weren't a cheat code. They were a trade. Visibility for surprise, doctrine for physics, comfort for consequence. The men who made it a habit also made it a discipline. Keep the fear, spend it wisely, and never let the blur turn into bravado. After June came momentum. Through July and into August of 1944, the Chattanooga Choo-Choo effort widened from airfields to the arteries that fed them: rail lines, bridges, fuel farms. Unit logs claim trains burning by the mile and aircraft wrecked on the ground by the hundreds. According to USAAF reports, the numbers are breathtaking and imperfect. Low-level battle damage is hard to count cleanly. Claims overlap. Wrecks get counted twice. The important part isn't the headline figure. It's what disappeared from the German calendar. Capacity, timetables, the idea that daylight movement was safe. The method didn't stop with pistons. In Korea, F-80 seconds and F-84 seconds took the hedge-hopping playbook to jet speeds low, fast, brutal on supply columns and forward strips. The language updated, not the logic. By Vietnam, F-4 Phantoms and A-7 Corsairs were flying interdiction, so low the jungle canopy became armor. A new term stuck: nap of the earth. It meant what the Thunderbolt crews had already learned in France, that terrain isn't just scenery, it's cover, timing, and leverage. And then there's the air that wears the name. The A-10 Thunderbolt II is not a P-47 with turbines, but the family resemblance is deliberate. Heavy armor under the belly, redundant systems that keep you flying after hits that should end the day. Weapons and sights optimized to find, fix, and finish ground targets in seconds. Training that treats valleys and ridgelines like friendly hands. Different century, different threats, same core bargain. Take the fight where physics favors you. The real legacy isn't just hardware. It's how an organization decides to survive. In 1943, the briefings were producing empty chairs. The answer was not to shout the doctrine louder. It was to question it, test a smaller, risk-bounded alternative, and when it worked, standardize it fast. That loop from data to doubt to trial to doctrine is why a handful of pilots could turn a theater. It's also why the story still matters. Altitude gives you visibility, low altitude gives you surprise. In the summer of 1943, surprise was the only protection that counted.